of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Call on Government Order of the Day number 2.
Interrupted debate on the second reading of the Accounting Infrastructure Reform Bill.
Well, just before... Oh, yes, the member does have the call. He has 3.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To recap from my interruption in discussing this issue a couple of weeks ago, this bill appeared before the Select Committee and on the face of it seemed to be a relatively straightforward bill, the Accountancy Infrastructure Reform Bill. One issue, though, took up most of the committee's time, and that issue concerned a request for an exemption on the basis of religious grounds from the requirement to belong to the statutory authority, the accounting body. A pair of submitters, Mr. Brian Prestige and Michael Powell, came before the committee and brought before us a request that the changes in the bill that required auditors and qualified statutory accountants to belong to professional bodies, they claimed that that was a limitation on the right of freedom association in the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act of 1990. Now, these pair of submitters, Mr. Speaker, were members of a religious organisation. It happened to be the Exclusive Brethren. But what they were actually bringing before the committee was a fairly significant point of principle, and I believe that there will be quite a bit of discussion in the House around that, because it did seriously exercise the committee in terms of how it would address it. And certainly from my own perspective, the prospect of a precedent being created where members of a profession could undertake their profession and not have to belong to the statutory body which was managing that profession and holding everyone to account was a concern, because it raised the prospect of how far do you go and where do you draw the line on these matters. The reason for this regulation of auditors is ultimately to protect consumers, and it was important that the committee consider that, because it was consumers, those who rely on the conclusions of an audit, are usually not in a position to assess its quality. So we believe that the professional self-regulatory model under which this legislation is based was appropriate for this legislation, but these members did not want to have to belong to this to the regulatory body, which would actually be performing the regulation, and that was the issue which taxed us. There were several reports provided to the committee on this, and no doubt we're going to hear about how that process was undertaken. I look forward to discussing this further in the House.
Kanwal Bakshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to take